The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
I'm your darkest dream. They call me devil. My heart is empty. They call me devil, and you should be afraid.
This show is based on true events. We may use audio, transcripts, and other media to show the true graphic nature of predators. For legal purposes, this is our research. We are not legal, mental, or medical professionals and do not claim to be. This show is meant to educate and create change in how we deal with predators and the survivors of their abuse. If you or someone else observes someone being abused, please seek help and report it. Some subjects may be disturbing for some individuals. You've been warned. Welcome to Betrayal on Armed Radio every Friday from 10 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. This show is part memoir and part investigative journey into the dark world of predators and the survivors who lived through it. On tonight's show, it's part 2 of the Cleopatra saga of blood and betrayal. Now, in the first part of the show, we heard about how she seduced Julius Caesar, had a son, and Julius Caesar was assassinated by the Roman court. Right now, Cleopatra has fled the city of Rome back to Egypt. And now we pick up where she meets Mark Antony, and the saga continues of blood and betrayal on Armed Radio. The saddest thing about betrayal is that it never comes from your enemies. Let's get started. Cleopatra, referred as the Serpent of the Nile, was the last active ruler of the Ptolemy Kingdom of Egypt. She was known to be the most beautiful and intelligent woman of her time. A diplomat, a naval commander, a linguistics, and medical author, Cleopatra was indeed a great woman of power. However, her failure as a queen was visible because of the falling in love with two great men of the Roman Empire, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, at the age of 39. Cleopatra grew up to marry and then defeat her own brother King Ptolemy XIII. But surviving this viper's nest was only the beginning. Roman's army was too vast, brutal, efficient for Egyptians to defeat. Cleopatra realized that the only way to keep the Romans at bay was to keep them on her side. And to do that, she seduced the legendary Julius Caesar. Cleopatra used her assets very cleverly and very wisely. And just 25 years old, Cleopatra was the queen of Egypt and the lover of Julius Caesar, and the mother of his son, a child that she had hoped would inherit not just Egypt, but the vast new empire uniting Egypt and Rome. She had this child who linked Rome and Egypt. She was protected position. Everything was in place. But on the 15th of March, 44 BC, the world that Cleopatra had fought so hard to create came crashing down. Caesar is murdered. Suddenly, everything is thrown up into the air again for Cleopatra. Caesar's death was a catastrophe. Cleopatra could have lost everything when Caesar was killed, but there's clearly still fight in the spirit of this woman. She was a strategist, and she was not quite ready to leave the game yet. With her lover and protector dead, Cleopatra needed help to stop the Romans from invading Egypt and stealing its riches. she needed to find a new ally in Rome, and the stakes could have been higher. Her life, her son's life, and the fate of her nation depended on it. It was up to her to use her talents as a politician to try and forge a new alliance and essentially rebuild from scratch the kind of relationship with Rome that she had when she was with Caesar. So, she set her sights on Caesar's replacement, the new ruler of Roman Empire, Mark Antony. He would be Cleopatra's next conquest, her greatest love and a fatal mistake. He prided himself on being the descendant of Hercules who goes around hiking up the hemline of his tunic to show off his muscular calves and wears shorts. Cleopatra carefully was working her magic before their meeting had even begun. Cleopatra had cast her spell on Mark Antony. He knows that she is trying to work him, and she knows that he's going to want all the resources of Egypt, but it's part of the game for Cleopatra. This was a game of life and death. She knew he wanted her money to fund his military campaigns. She used it to barter for her life and the life of her son, and Egyptians' independence. To Cleopatra, there were no boundaries between business and pleasure. For her, sex was power. It's a little bit of a clever manipulation, I think. As a clever woman, she lets him think that he's seducing her, and the sexual chemistry between the two of them was powerful. And it's one of the greatest love stories that has ever been told, because they were hot for each other. They were each other's greatest asset, and they would be the death of each other. Cleopatra schemed and seduced her way back into positions of power. Mark Antony would become the love of her life, and he would be the cause of her death. The smoldering tension between the Egyptian queen and the Roman ruler would ignite an inferno of lust, decadence, and murder that would consume Cleopatra and send the ancient world ablaze. Let's go to a commercial. From international best-selling author Kasy Spears and award-winning director Glenn Spillman comes a book. This story is dirtier than Dirty John. We have the narcissistic, psychotic sociopath tell his side of the story. This story is told by the survivor and the perpetrator. Part memoir and part investigation to the world of predator people and the methods they use to con people. Blunt, graphic, and oddly exhilarating. The abuse of the criminal system, educational, naval, and religious institution. Some people say, train your mind to see the good in everything. I say, train your mind to see the truth in everything. Good, evil will always exist. However, when we condition ourselves to only see the good, we leave the door open for evil to rise. Intrigued? You have no idea what's coming next. Available now on Amazon in ebook, print, and soon in audiobooks. Don't summon my demons if you aren't ready to play with them. Pandora's Box. Available on Amazon. Get your copy today. Now, 3 years after the disaster of Caesar's death, Cleopatra had once again found a powerful Roman ally. Mark Antony was so dazzled by Cleopatra when they met at his place, he pursued her back to Egypt, officially. He traveled to Alexandria on business to secure funds for his military campaign. But in reality, he stayed for pleasure. He liked playing the Egyptian games, and he liked the gymnasium environment and the competition of displaying his physical prowess of good looks and muscles and all sorts of things. Mark Anthony was a very vain, prideful, boastful person, very physically fit and very much in the gym every single day. However, Mark Anthony was also besotted with the Egyptian queen and her exotic culture. Caesar went to Alexandria, and he was almost like a little invasion. Mark Anthony goes to Alex, takes off his toga, and he goes out drinking with Cleopatra. And he just flings himself. Into the society. Cleopatra and Anthony just have a wild time in Alexander. Basically, like a really wild night in Las Vegas. They're drinking, they're taking off their clothes, and yeah, having a good old time. They're gambling, they are doing drinking games, and they're flirting. So it's on like Donkey Kong. Now, Cleopatra's seduction of Mark Anthony begins as a calculated political move, but in a matter of weeks, things had changed, and there was more passion, more love, and even less control in the relationship with Mark Anthony than with Julius Caesar. With Julius Caesar, she mostly ran the show. And with Mark Anthony, it's the exact opposite. She is now under the spell of Mark Anthony, and he runs the show. So it's very much a change dynamic there. Let's just say Cleopatra was very bendy in the sack, and nothing was off the table as far as sexual things. It got wild. We're talking wild. And Cleopatra, being the chameleon character that she is, she was how do we say this on radio? We'll just say it's censored at this point. Everything that went on. Their actual pictures, well, drawings, because they didn't have pictures back then, but there's actual drawings of these encounters. And they're probably a lot of propaganda, but it's very hot, if you can, these pictures. So, Cleopatra did whatever she needed to do to hang on to power. There was no boundary. There was nothing that was off the table. Whatever needed to be done, whatever it was, she was willing to do. So, they say, if the devil can't make you bad, he makes you busy. And the devil is in the details. Well, she was definitely into the details. And so, during this time that she's having this romantic encounter with Mark Anthony, she is technically, which is kind of weird how to say this, she was, according to Egyptian rules, she was married to Caesar. But at the same time, she's married to her brother, Ptolemy XIII. We kind of forgot about the kid. I mean, he's growing up in the background. He's not really much of a threat, but he is becoming one. And so basically, she's kind of was involved, married to two people at the same time. Nobody thought anything different of it. Now, she's basically having a romantic relationship with Mark Anthony, and she's technically married to her brother, Ptolemy the 13th. And so, Ptolemy, as he was growing up, he grew into be a threat to Cleopatra's power. And she didn't like that. She didn't like it at all. So, Cleopatra knew that the only way to survive was to be in power and to get rid of all your rivals. And that included your family members. So, a coincidence happened. He suddenly dies. And how he died was far from a coincidence. And likely she had him murdered. So, the dirty details of this is that suddenly somebody or some people basically captured him inside the palace, took him down to what we would call the dungeon area. He was put behind like a cell type of area where he was locked away. Well, in Egypt, they've got a few deadly snakes. One is called an asp, and it's also known as the 1, 2, 3 snake, which means in 3 steps you're dead. They also have the king cobra, the one with the big, huge collar that we see on the headdresses of the Egyptians. Well, the asp, the king cobra, you're gonna, die a little bit slower. With the asp, you die pretty quickly. So, he dies mysteriously of a snake bite. Now, if you know anything about snake bites, what happens is when they bite you, the venom goes through your bloodstream towards your heart. And what happens is when they bite their prey, animals or humans, which are not their normal prey, they're not going to eat a human. They'll protect themselves because asps, as a snake, are very aggressive snakes. And if you're in a small cell, it doesn't matter if you're on one end and he's on the other end, the snake is on the other end, it's going to slither towards you and you're going to piss it off. So the snake already has, an attitude problem. And so it's already pissed off when it was put into the area. So it's just a matter of time before it hits the intended target. So when the venom hits your bloodstream, it starts to paralyze you. You start to freak out. You start to, your heart rate starts to speed up. And because your heart rate starts to speed up, the venom enters your heart a lot faster. So staying calm is not really an option. You start to sweat, you start to swell up, you start to bruise, and basically what happens is that as it enters your heart, it starts to basically slow your heart down, and you panic. So you're trying to breathe, and at the same time, it starts to constrict your lungs to where you can't breathe. And so you're basically frozen in panic as the poison seeps in and starts to close down your organs, mostly your heart, your lungs. And then once your heart stops, your brain is still processing about 30 seconds to, it's been said, once a person's considered, when they're determining if you're dead or not, you'll go what is called code, and that's where your heart stops. And that medical term that they say, you've coded. Your heart stops, and so you have that one single solitary line, beep. And so as you code, they start to see if your lungs are still functioning. Once your lungs stop functioning, It's just they count basically an additional 30 seconds to a minute before they call saying you are deceased, whenever they're calling that a person's deceased, after they code. So once that happens, when you are, the last thing that shuts down is your brain. And that's when a lot of people start to see the heaven and those kind of things. Because what happens is that as your body starts to shut down, which is your heart, your lungs, those things shut down, your brain is like going, oh my gosh, start breathing, heart start pumping. It's freaking out. And so literally you start going through every single memory that you have in rapid succession. And that's what doctors like to say is where your, near-death experience comes from, is that your brain is really literally like putting a VCR or your video on high speed. You're like watching your life flash before your eyes for about 30 seconds before your brain doesn't have blood coming to it, doesn't have oxygen coming to it, and it shuts down and you're dead. So imagine being able to hear, being able to somewhat process things as you're dying. So it must have been horrific, because this guy is a teenager still. He's not even 18 years old. And his sister just put an asp. And the thing is that there's two stories. There's one where she put the asp in a basket with a lid on it into the cell herself, and actually watched him be bitten and watched him die, just to make sure that he didn't escape, just to make sure it was done right. That's some sickness right there. So, if you wanted a job done right, you gotta do it yourself. And the other one is that he's captured, brought into the dungeon. Both end up in the dungeon, and she has a trusted advisor do the deed. Now, there are more stories that prove that she was the one who actually did the deed, and she was the one who got soldiers to put him away in this cell and make sure that it was done. And there are stories that it was between the asp and drowning him, like upside down and like holding him underwater until he died. So they chose the asp, which both are horrific in itself. So, going back to our story, Cleopatra just now killed her husband, her brother, her family member, and she eliminated her brother. So that leaves her sister, Asenaway, who's in Turkey, who's exiled in Turkey right now. So, yeah. So Asenaway finds out that her brother's been killed. And, it's said that Asenaway was kind of one of the, if you can say, nicer, more reputable Ptolemy person, because she knew she was never going to be on the throne. So she just kind of did her own thing. Now, she's young herself. And so, now with the help of Mark Antony, Cleopatra was on the warpath to tidy up loose ends. And that included her sister, who was exiled in Turkey, and that was beyond Cleopatra's reach, but not beyond Mark Antony's. Talk about your killer couples. So, Mark Antony commanded his soldiers to go to Turkey. Now, Asenaway is in basically what is called a tower, and it's still there in Egypt, and the damage from what they did to it is still evidence. So, this tower is almost like a temple, which would be considered like a church. And you simply just don't go inside churches and pull people out. It's kind of like sanctuary. You don't go in churches and pull them out because they're safe within those confines. Well, she was in this tower. And so, yeah. So, supposedly safe, supposedly in sanctuary, supposedly being kind of like a nun. This is what her sister was doing. No possible threat, except the fact is that she's a royal of royal blood. And that is the only threat that she is to Cleopatra's throne. So Mark Antony dispatched soldiers to Assiniboine and they basically have her killed. So how this happens is that the soldiers basically ram in the door, which is a wooden door. And this is during the night. And so they basically she's basically a virgin here, grab this young girl. I believe Assiniboine was probably she might have been like 12, 13 years old at the time, grabs her, hauls her butt out of this temple, like dragging her on the ground by her legs, out of this temple. And that's how they justify it. It's like, she's not in the temple when I'm actually killing her. We're just taking her, which you're not supposed to do. She's alive when you leave the temple, technically. So we're not really breaking any rules. So they take her outside of the temple, and the soldiers, they rape her. To the point, they beat her, they rape her, and then they basically rip her apart, literally. So what they do is they take one leg onto one horse, another leg onto another horse, and have the horse pointed in two separate directions, and then yell mush or yell go or whatever the Roman equivalent is of it. The two horses are basically going in two separate directions very quickly. You basically, like a wishbone, pop a person in half. So basically, she's been raped, she's been beaten, she's been pulled out of her bed total shock and surprise, and then ripped apart. She doesn't even have a chance to have her heart stop or anything like that. The last thing she knows is terror as she's being ripped apart. But she's been beaten so much that she's probably barely clinging on to life when they rip her apart. But she still is alive. So now her sister Assiniboine is dead. Her brother is dead. No more threats to her crown or to her power. Her son is now directly in line to the throne. So once she knows that she's gone, her son is secure to be the next king of England. Or not England. The next king of Egypt. And so she has total power. And she's drunk with it. And so her, son, Caesar, or Caesarion, is basically set. So we basically, Queen's dead, and the threat to Rome had been neutralized because she basically had Mark Antony where she wanted him, which is in her bed. Cleopatra had this immense amount of power. So she held a celebration for Mark Antony, and basically it was on this her barge, which is this huge ship, big old party, and let's just say they couldn't keep their hands off of each other. They were constantly knocking the boots. It was like non-stop freak fest on there. And so basically this was creating a huge scandal back in Rome. And they were just like, wow, this is not cool. And Cleopatra to the Romans was how they viewed her was this drunk person who was a tyrant and a whore and basically a partying bad girl, pretty much. And they were just in shock over this. And so Cleopatra's debauched affair with Mark Antony is perfect ammunition for his rival back in the Roman Senate, Octavian Normal, that's his name. And he was just 22 years old. Now remember this name Octavian because, oh my goodness, he was not a good person. Oh, if you've ever heard of, oh my goodness, some other Romans, I'm about to tell you much later on. But Octavian, not a good person. He's 22 years old. And he's a politician and was already co-ruler of the Roman Empire, sharing the power with Mark Antony. Now, if we know anything about this, people don't like to share. And so someone's going to get a little greedy. So the uneasy alliance between Mark Antony and Octavian, basically the two men were butting heads for dominance of the Roman Empire. And so Octavian took the Western Roman Empire and Antony the East. But there's a problem. The Roman aristocrats and the Roman aren't going to share power with anybody, and they basically set for themselves up for war. And so Alexandria is Mark Antony is basically Mark Antony is in Alexandria, which is an Egyptian city. And so Mark Antony is basically partying his butt off with Cleopatra, and they just don't know what's going on in Rome. Because Rome's in the, it's in Italy, they're in Egypt, who the heck cares? Let's just party it up. Whoop, whoop. And so Rome, they are basically collecting troops. And they're just like, dude, I'm not sharing. They're like, we don't want to share with the Egyptians. We want it all for ourselves. And so Octavian has growing power because he's got the Senate, he's got the Romans, he's got it all, he thinks. So the growing threat of Octavian, Cleopatra now figures this out, and she focuses all of her fierce intelligence on basically Cleopatra is so focused on Mark Antony and basically securing his support. And there is actually a famous story that she was going to throw the most expensive banquet in history. And basically, she coyly challenges Antony on how much money can you spend on a party. And so Antony, they're basically holding parties like, I'll throw the most expensive party. No, I'll throw the most expensive party, basically. So they're doing that. And so Cleopatra takes one of her pearl earrings, which these are like giant. Have you ever seen a jawbreaker? It's like the size of a jawbreaker. And takes it off and drops it into a glass of vinegar. this pearl and this vinegar wine, actually, and it dissolves it, and then he drinks it down. So she's popped off her pearl, which is maybe not the size of a giant jawbreaker, like a small one, drops it in this vinegar wine, which is disgusting if you think about it. And then he drinks it. But if you have to think about it, their goblets that they had are made out of pewter, which is consisted of a lot of lead, a lot of mercury, which causes people to have mental issues, a lot of hallucinations and things like that. So that one goblet of wine was like so expensive because it had a pearl in it. And so Cleopatra had outsmarted Mark Antony because she was clever, more clever than him. And there are telltale signs that in some stories that we hear that the relationship, that it suggests that Cleopatra was the more intelligent in the relationship and was the one who was really manipulating Mark Antony in a way that she wasn't able to with Julius Caesar. Because if you remember Mark Antony, he's so vain, he's in the gym, he's like, I've got muscles and things like that. And so this ambitious queen wanted her lover's help to build an empire of her own. And so the ambition was rooted deep in her past and inspired by a man entombed in Alexandria, the great Alexander's lost empire. She wanted that for herself, which Alexander the Great wanted to basically conquer the whole entire world. And now Cleopatra wants Egypt to be the whole entire world. And if we know about anybody who wants to conquer the whole entire world, you're up for disaster. So basically she's greedy. So basically her siblings are dead. Mark Antony is under her spell. And they're wanting to make this dream a reality and conquer the Mediterranean Empire. Good luck with that one. So, basically, her son would inherit this huge, vast empire. And so that's what she wanted to do. So, having this multicultural world that Cleopatra wanted and everything like that, of course, has a ton of flaws of that. And so while she was partying it up with in Alexandria with Mark Antony, he'd been losing his grip on power in the Roman Senate. So Mark Antony was starting to become not so popular in the Roman Senate. So, yeah, let's go to another commercial break. From the author Glenn Spillman comes his next book. Beneath a blood-red moon sits a quiet town in Colorado. Years ago, an old Indian curse almost destroyed the town. Now, it's 40 years later, and a blood moon will rise along with an ancient curse, threatening to destroy all they have rebuilt. Will a forbidden love bring the end of the curse? You must read to find out more in Blood Spirit, The Cursed Tribe, Book 1, now available on Amazon in ebook form, printed, and soon in audio. Go to Amazon and get The Blood Spirit. What are you afraid of? Against Mark Antony, and basically plotting his downfall. And this is about early 40 BC. And after being months in Alexandria, partying it up, I mean, we're talking, it's like Vegas. You know, he finally heeded the warning signs and returned to Rome. He finally saw the giant neon sign that's saying, hello, there's a problem here. So he finally saw the writing on the wall. He's like, whoa, I probably need to go to Rome and kind of kiss some butt. So basically, he leaves Cleopatra. And according to this, Cleopatra is pregnant again with Mark Antony's son. So she has one son through Julius Caesar. So now she's pregnant with her second child through Mark Antony. So basically, how he leaves is almost like a mistress being scorned. And she's not too happy about it. So basically, she was pining for him, and she was a bit peeved off. So, with Mark Antony back in the Roman Senate, they've discovered that he has no more friends in Rome. And so, he comes back to Egypt going, dude, I don't have any friends in Rome anymore. What the crap? And so, Cleopatra was like, well, you're powerful. You led the most powerful armies. We've got some Roman soldiers here who are loyal to you. Let's go after Octavian. And so they basically wage a battle. And they are winning this first battle. And so basically, Cleopatra is in Rome, and she gives birth to twins. And it's not sure what kind of twins, if they're a boy and a girl, or they're two boys, if they're two girls. Nothing's really sure about this. So basically, somehow they're in Rome. She's pregnant, she gives birth, and basically, this is right before war is waged. But this is what's on their mind. They're like, if these people don't come to us, we're basically going to rebel. So Mark Antony has Cleopatra in Rome. And so they get married Roman style. So they play the happy family. And basically, new wife, 2 kids, or 3 kids. And, happy wife, happy family. They're playing their part. And he's trying to strengthen his grip on, he's mostly being in the Senate. They're writing love notes to each other. And they're trying to get their dream of, Egypt and Rome together and conquering the world. And basically, Mark Antony is thinking with his other head and not with his brain. And so Octavian has already put into place his power and authority. He's just being kind of silent about it. And so because of Cleopatra's actions and because of Mark Antony's actions, they're basically on a collision course like Thelma and Louise, heading towards that cliff. And so, basically, it's just a disaster waiting to happen. She had spent her whole life avoiding a war with Rome. And right now, guess what's about to happen? Her nightmare is about to come true, and it's going to be gnarly. So, basically, she is looking at a war with Rome, and which would, when you are defeated by the Roman Empire, you're basically hauled through the streets, humiliated, where you have to beg for your own death, and the Romans will give it to you. So basically, humiliated, and then finally, beg for it to end, and then they kill you. So she knows this, and she's going to be betrayed by the man she loves, Mark Antony, and she's been driven by obsession to rule Egypt and beyond, and the Mediterranean Empire, perhaps even Rome. and she was counting on Mark Antony to help her make this dream a reality. And as Mark Antony's lover and the mother of his children, Cleopatra had hoped he would carve out an empire that she might rule alongside him. So in 37 BC, she funded his military campaign to conquer Alexander, the greatest lost empire in the East. But Cleopatra's ambition wasn't matched by Mark Antony's ability. His campaign was a disaster, where he loses a large chunk of his military army and has nothing to show for it. It wasn't going, it's not good for an ego soldier to lose. They have a tendency to throw a big old temper tantrum. And so he was portrayed as this awesome Herculean soldier that could never be defeated. And the truth be told, he just wasn't that great of a commander-in-chief. And it showed. And so the fact is that he survives doesn't diminish the fact that he was humiliated. So he fled to Alexandria. Now there's a lot of A's. Alexander is one city. There's an Alexandria, and they're both in Egypt. No, Alexander, I believe, is in Rome or in Italy. There's two different areas, so try not to get those confused. It's very easy to do so. So basically, he comes, with his tail between his legs back to the arms of Cleopatra. And despite his defeat, he's able to, I guess, divvy up parts of the empire that he already has to his children and Cleopatra's children, and also to little Caesar, not the pizza. And so they decided that they were going to somehow, with Cleopatra helping, defeat the Roman Empire. I don't know what they were smoking, but it was something good, because this is really just some crazy stuff. So she's obviously desperate. He's wrapped up with rose-colored goggles, and so Octavian has his eyes on Egypt and basically conquering Cleopatra in more ways than one. He wants to have her in his bed as his concubine and basically, do that. And so that's Octavian. And Octavian is probably like, like a wimpy, nerdy, ooh, I don't want to touch that type of person. So, Rome is known to be the master of strategy, and Octavian had been realizing that he could seize Egypt and all the riches, because right now they've been defeated and this could be the time to strike back. And so by eliminating Mark Antony, he could claim Cleopatra as a gift to himself and basically get a prize, more than one prize. So, yeah, lots of stuff going on right now. So, Octavia declares war against Egypt. And a year later, after a string of defeats for Cleopatra and Mark Antony, Octavian's legions were closing in on Alexandria, and a painful truth was dawning on Cleopatra. She made the wrong choice. Initially, Octavian was the military strategist. He was silent but deadly. And Mark Antony, he was stupid and basically ego-driven. And this was the wrong person, and that's the person she chose. No one expected Octavian to be the one who would triumph in the end. Anthony was the person everyone expected to win. They were completely shocked at Octavian's skills. Octavian had some skittles. So, Octavian basically made Cleopatra an offer. Says, basically saying, I'm going to pay you money if you will promise that the security of Egypt and Cleopatra sent a message to Octavian and basically made him an offer when she was not in a position to do so. So this is just how much of an ego these people had. She says, I'm going to pay you money if you will promise that the security of Egypt and my son, Caesarion, can be guaranteed by Rome. But Octavian didn't want Cleopatra to, Octavian didn't want Cleopatra's cash, and he wanted her country with all its wealth and status for himself. And he didn't care about her kids or anything like that. He wanted it all. And he was in a position, he knew it, that he could just take it all with or without her consent. And so he also wanted Mark Antony dead. And basically, the lovers at this time are doomed. And so all they could do at this point was wait for Octavian to arrive. And so basically, they plotted their own suicide. And so they had like a drinking club type of thing. And so it's basically the suicide club, if you will, So their friends were like, we're all just going to commit mass suicide and everything. So with the handful of troops, Cleopatra realizes that the only way out would be death. But she was determined that if she did die, it would be at the she was determined that if she had to die, it would not be at the hands of Octavian. Suicide was something different to those who lived in the ancient world. This was a culture at times that doesn't pretend that death doesn't happen, knowing that everything is going to die. It's just, they view things really differently. And a lot of times you die badly, and a lot of pain, illnesses, or in battle, and, tons of different ways. And so the people who were powerful and good could control their death. So Cleopatra decided to experiment in poison that she would use. So she took people and tested the different poisons out to see which caused the least violent, most dignified death, and get the right poison. So she was just seeing, okay, well, you died this way, I don't want to die that way. Okay, you died this way. Okay, this sounds good. Custom death cocktails, I guess you could say. And so yeah, so she's just sitting there just killing people just to see how they reacted. And she wanted to go well into the afterlife. So the Queen of Egypt is plotting her death because she knows that she's not going to be dragged through the streets and humiliated. She's like, I'm going to choose my own way to go. So she planned carefully her exit. And on August the 1st, 30 BC, after many days planning her death, Cleopatra said goodbye to Mark Antony for the last time. And he left the palace to make one final stand against Octavian's army. But Mark Antony's troops had already surrendered. So she's realizing her dream is gone. And she's realizing this Octavian guy is basically heck bent on humiliating her and killing her. And so it's just a matter of time. So she chooses to take her own life. And she has a huge dramatic way that she wants to plan out her death. In her funeral attire, which is very ornate, attire. And so she's decided, how she's going to be, kill herself. And so with that, she basically chooses, because she's not able to get to the poisons because she's under house arrest. So one of the servants smuggles in an asp in a basket. This is her only way to go out. And she's not even sure how this is going to happen, how she's going to go into the afterlife. I mean, she saw her brother many, many years ago, and that was like a long, drunken, long time ago. I'm sure that she's forgotten. So, she was divine goddess, and so she was in this golden outfit with the wings of Isis, which is like feathers and everything. And it's funny that the serpent of the Nile would be destroyed by a serpent. As the doors finally open, she's laying down, and her heart has stopped, her lungs have stopped, and she's basically bruised from, the snake bites, because snakes like biting. Her servants are, preparing her out. They're getting, they eventually get bit by the snake, and so they're dying. And so she dies, and Octavia doesn't get the final victory. And that concludes Blood and Betrayal. It's just a brutal thing. And we're going to talk about more brutal families. And this is a contemporary case that has already been sentenced, but it's still quite terrible, of the greed of families, of just how people just go bonkers. And so tune in next week at the same time for another discussion into the world of criminal minds. And I will see you next week. Bye-bye now.
Lake me on fire.